Good morning, Lexington. I'm Mary Paige Welch.
And I'm Anna DeKosh.
We're here with the Lexington Minute. Today, we will discuss current poverty measures in the U.S. and its drawbacks and advantages. Later, we will propose a solution to the challenges we currently face in defining and measuring poverty.
What is poverty? One could argue poverty is subjective, and to an extent, that's true, because, as Amiri Sen argues, poverty cannot be independent of society. However, poverty needs to be objective. Poverty is a conceptual standard of living, but it can translate to something tangible. Being deprived via a lack of means to support oneself socially, economically, and/or politically can be considered living in poverty.
To start, I will discuss the official poverty measure, or the OPM. The OPM is the measurement that the Census Bureau uses to determine poverty status. The OPM uses gross annual pre-tax income to determine if individuals and families fall above or below the poverty threshold. The threshold is determined by taking a monotonous but nutritious food basket identified in 1955, adjusting it for inflation using the Consumer Price Index, and multiplying it by 3, since food expenses in 1955 were determined to account for about a third of a family's income. These thresholds are then differentiated by household makeup. To contextualize this measurement, know that in 2017, the poverty threshold was $12,000 for a single individual and $24,000 for a four-person family unit.
An advantage of the OPM is the ease with which it is measured. Using gross annual pre-tax income gives us a concrete way to determine who is struggling. However, the OPM is flawed. One of its many disadvantages is how it only takes into account cash income. Near cash and in-kind benefits, which are resources allocated to those in poverty, are not accounted for in the OPM. Therefore, the OPM does not illustrate an accurate picture of how Americans are faring. Also, it does not factor in circumstance, such as geographical location. An individual making $15,000 a year in New York City and an individual making the same amount in rural Oklahoma are both considered out of poverty. However, the expenses they face may not be the same, such as housing and transportation. Thus, their living circumstance could be drastically different, even though they are viewed as equals in the eyes of the OPM. Keep these factors in mind as I discuss another popular way to measure poverty.
Another widely used measure of poverty is the Supplemental Poverty Measure, or the SPM. It was implemented in 2011 to supplement the OPM. It is not used to determine the amount of government assistance a household receives, but can be an indicator of how households are faring after receiving these benefits. This ability to highlight the effects of EITC, TANF, and SNAP, and other in-kind benefits is the biggest advantage of measuring poverty with the SPM.
Now, to dive into the details of the SPM. The first difference with the SPM is that individuals are considered as a part of households, not families. This is an important distinguisher to note, considering some adults cohabit for many years without marrying. For these people, cohabitors would be considered as separate families in the OPM, though they are likely pooling resources to some degree, but within the SPM, they are considered as one household. After individuals are allocated to households, the SPM accounts for their gross annual pre-tax income and adds any in-kind near-cash benefits they receive from the government. If you remember, this is different than the OPM because the OPM only considers gross annual pre-tax income, which makes sense since the OPM is used to determine the in-kind benefits given to families. After adding these resources, non-discretionary expenses are subtracted. This includes expenses such as childcare, transportation, healthcare, and taxes. Once these are accounted for, a number is determined and measured against a threshold that is adjusted for geographic differences. The income threshold that the SPM sets is calculated by multiplying the presumed expenses of food, clothing, shelter, and utilities by 1.2 to account for 40 to 60% of the median household income.
In conjunction with the SPM and OPM, can illustrate part of the effect of in-kind benefits given by the government. However, these measurements focus on the monetary aspects of poverty. Sen articulates the flaw in focusing on monetary differences by highlighting the importance of one's quality of life or social inclusion when determining poverty measures. Sen's writings in Affluence indicate how determining income levels is not sufficient to understand poverty. Aspects like capabilities and functionings must also be considered. Capabilities are the choices one has in life, and functionings, also sometimes called achievement, are the choices that one makes.
Now that you have a clear idea of the monetary measurements of poverty using the OPM and SPM, we'll take you to the field to discuss how we can ameliorate some of the issues with the current method of measuring poverty in the U.S.
Thanks, Anna. I'm Julie Andrews, reporting live from the campus of Washington and Lee University. I was supposed to meet an old friend of mine, Howard Pickett, a poverty and human capabilities professor. However, he tore his hamstring, giving a lecture. So I'm on my own. As Anna mentioned earlier in our show, people living in poverty are being deprived of something. Of what, though? Well, a number of things. How do we fix that? The answer to that question starts with figuring out how we should measure poverty. The OPM, the SPM alone, they're lacking. The OPM and SPM, being monetary based, don't take into account the human being behind the income. Yes, it's easy to measure. However, it doesn't tell the whole story. When you're talking about poverty, we're talking about people, because in reality, money only does so much. In her capabilities approach, Martha Nussbaum asks the question, what about human dignity? Life, bodily health, bodily integrity, emotions, the list goes on. These are all things Nussbaum deems central to a dignified human existence. When these capabilities are lacking, people are being deprived of dignity. So what does this have to do with measuring poverty? Those of us at the Lexington Minute believe that the combination of an altered version of the SPM with capabilities approach is the best way to measure poverty. Why no OPM? It's simple. The SPM and the OPM conflict. When we're measuring poverty, we want to know how people are doing, not how they would be doing without their benefits. The SPM factors this in and eliminates those who have risen above the poverty threshold. Where we changed the SPM up a bit was by reworking its threshold. We kept the FCSU times 1.2 equation, but rather than being above or below poverty, a scale is to be implemented within the measure. Also, the OPM does not consider geographic differences, and locational variety can cause large cost discrepancies, thus why we're sticking with the SPM. But right now, I'm just talking about the monetary measurement of poverty, and that's not all of it. Those of us at the Lexington Minute believe that the capabilities approach is integral to measuring and defining poverty, because being in poverty doesn't just mean you lack money. It means you lack capabilities. I recognize that measuring one's capabilities is difficult, and that people choose to live differently, but the capabilities approach doesn't look at what someone is achieving. It's looking at what an individual has the opportunity to achieve. So they still have the freedom of choice. This poverty measurement just makes sure that that choice is there. Much like Amiri Sen wrote in Capabilities and Well-Being, the capabilities approach looks at the capabilities set an individual has, all the functionings one is able to choose from. The individual then has the choice to decide what functionings they will achieve. Sen and Nussbaum recognize that poverty isn't black and white, and that's why this measurement is so important. Different types of poverty exist, and this revised measure will account for the spectrum of poverty and lack of capabilities that can exist without extreme monetary strain. Poverty is about more than money, and this measurement is a step in the right direction. This is Julie Andrews, signing off from the Lexington Minute.